Okay, so we've had 2 days to digest the news and follow the fallout of Carlo Ancelotti jumping ship after around 16 months as Everton manager to rejoin Real Madrid following the departure of Zinedine Zidane. Now, I don't blame Everton for what's happened, but in order for me to not fall completely out of love with supporting the club, I'm going to attempt a series of Everton-centric episodes of the podcast with a few here or there around, personal and professional interests. But I want to get on Everton-centric guests in different fields and different domains to dissect the situation that the club now find themselves in. Not an unfamiliar one, by the way, as their last four full-time managers didn't last more than 2 years in the job, and the fact that two of those are likely going to be in the dugout for El Clasico next season is absolutely fucking crazy. Richard, there are many angles that we can attack this from and analyse what's gone on, but before anything else, what was your reaction to the news and how did you feel over those 24 hours on the 1st of June?
Shock, really. I mean, no one saw this one coming. I mean, no one in the press pack, not even someone like Paul Joyce, who's one of the most well-connected football journalists on Merseyside. We all got a bit blindsided by it. I mean, I think we saw speculation doing the rounds about, Madrid were going to make an approach, and Ancelotti had actually tackled the speculation in his presser before the season ended. But I don't think anyone really in this part of the world saw it coming. I think we thought it was just quite a fancy by Madrid, and that Ancelotti would be quite principled and say, no, I've got a project here. I want to see out. I want to see them into the new stadium. I want to finish what I've started here. So for him to completely just about face on it, and second Florentino Perez started waving a vacant job in his direction, is it's quite gutting, really. I mean, I think the positions left Everton in is probably the first we've been allowed to say for the best part of a quarter of a century. I mean, you'd probably go back to Joe Royle walking out at the tail end of the 96-97 season as the last time the club has been, completely devoid of any strategy, any plan, any structure. It threw everything into chaos back then, and it took the club obviously quite a while to recover from that. And this feels very similar, albeit it's in very different circumstances. It's not a transfer dispute that's forced the manager's hand if the manager wants to go somewhere else. And from that respect, it's very, very gutting.
Yeah, it is. And one of the overwhelming feelings that I got following the news being officially announced, especially when you started seeing some of the names of the candidates that are getting bandied about, was that the major investment from Farhad Moshiri came in 2016, which is 5 years ago. Like, is it a fair assessment to say that Everton have made no progression during that time period?
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. I think you look at, how many managers Moshiri pointed permanently, you look, Sam Martinez, so Ronald Koeman, Sam Allardyce, Marco Silva, Carlo Ancelotti. That's four managers in his first 5 years as the majority investor at Goodison Park, and it does feel like there's always it always feels like there's a reset button just 18 months in, whether it's a manager underperforming and falling on the sword as Koeman, Silva and Allardyce all did. I mean, I think you probably argue that Allardyce did the job he was required to do, but he wasn't a long-term appointment. So, I mean, I feel like Moshiri has been burned by this desire, obsession, whatever you want to call it, that he touched upon when he got Koeman in 2016 about having having a Hollywood name to join the elite of Northwest football. He pointed to Mourinho at United, Pep Guardiola at Man City, and Klopp at Liverpool, and he wanted a name who would match that sort of prestige. And unfortunately, the man he got, who could have built something, who probably seemed quite a principled and honourable man, has now just showed he's exactly the same as every other manager and mercenary in world football by saying the second someone else comes in, I'm just going to jump shift to something bigger because I can. And that's what I think is the most disappointing thing about this. We all thought Ancelotti was a man of principle, a man who did did, believe what he said. And I mean, we mentioned it off air before, but the warning signs were there probably in the final weeks of the season. We didn't really pay attention to them because there was still the Europa League, Conference League, whatever it was, to fight for in the final 2 games. But, there's, screenshots of his daughter, wishing farewell to a local gym. There was Richarlison's post last week. Ancelotti's even, his message to the supporters when he came out for the Wolves game wasn't very forward-thinking, really, when you look back on it. He started, saying the fans make the difference, but it wasn't a case of, I'll see you next season, or, I can't wait for you to all be back and see where we can go from here. It was basically, you made the difference, and that was it. No thanks, no nothing. No, we'll see you again in August. So it does feel like, I've been covering Everton for 12 years, and since Moyes, it just feels like there's been a constant, reset period, whether it's, under Ken Wright's ownership or Machiri's. It always feels like we end up back at this place, and I feel like this is probably a bit more uncertain than the previous one, because at least, a new manager came in and you knew that they were starting from scratch. With this was a job which didn't even get to sort of reach the point where the manager either got Everton to a position where they wanted to be, or failed so drastically that he had to be jettisoned. So it's strange because, again, as I say, the Royal thing seems to be quite a fitting comparison, because it does feel like the club is completely bereft right now.
Yeah, I would say so. And I think you hit the nail on the head there in that Carlo Ancelotti coming across as this man of honour and integrity and values. The fact that he's completely turned on near enough everything that he'd said to the press, or at least, as we now know, the persona that he portrayed to the press. As I say, it's very hard for me to say that I'm calm and I've digested it and I've come to terms with it, because I haven't. This man is, of course, he's such a prestigious name in world football, and yes, it was a massive coup for Everton to have a manager like Carlo Ancelotti. Although I think an interesting touch point that we could discuss maybe in a bit is the contradiction between Carlo Ancelotti and his pragmatism and his model of an ideal player in comparison to that of director of football Marcel Brands. I do feel like there are a few contradictions there, which who knows may benefit Brands in the long term, that Ancelotti's now out of the job. But as I was saying, the fact that Ancelotti is now sort of turned on all of these values, the family club, the love of Crosby, everything that he's sort of come out with is just a blatant outright lie, which, as I say, since coming across as a man of integrity and honour, is just something that you didn't expect from him. And he did feel like that man for me. I felt like, we've bandied about for the right manager for so long. And Richard, that like in the years that you've known me, all I want is for Everton to be a successful football team and a successful football club. And you can't go far wrong if that's your goal in having Carlo Ancelotti as your manager. I think the case is to be made that his stock as a manager had not been lower in his entire managerial career than that of when he left Napoli. When you look at his time at Napoli, it wasn't that much longer than his time at Everton now. So we all knowledge of his sort of prior management in certain clubs. Like, would you say after finishing with Napoli, that is the lowest that his stock has ever been, so to speak? And so to be offered that opportunity now to jump ship back to Real is more of him. I know he hadn't won La Liga yet, and that, of course, will be a goal of his, but it's him stepping back into his comfort zone.
Possibly, yeah. I mean, it's interesting you say about Napoli, because it does feel very much like a similar situation to how it ended with Napoli, albeit they chose to sack him in the middle of, quite a mutinous internal war between the board and the dressing room, which obviously opened the door for him to come to Everton. It's strange because I think probably, you look at, since he went to Milan in 2001, he's not really finished well within second or third, has he, in a league campaign. Mm-hmm. Even when he got sacked by Real Madrid the first time, when he brought in Rafa Benitez, that was a great idea, by the way. That was brilliant. I know anyone who won, people talking about Rafa Benitez coming to Everton. I've got to say, I think when you look at his track record since leaving Liverpool, it's not been great. So, but that's a separate point. But Ancelotti's never really had a poor finish apart from Napoli. And I think Napoli, in a similar way to Everton, Napoli represented a sort of a legacy project. He thought he could not just be a check-up manager, he thought he could go in, revolutionise a club, restore them to former glory, similar to Everton. And Napoli both had their great heyday in the 1980s and have been yearning to get back there. And to be fair to Napoli, under Maurizio Sarri, they almost got there. Close. They just absolutely bottled it in the final weeks of the Serie A campaign a few seasons ago. Yeah. I don't know if you call it an Everton mindset kicked in or what, but something happened there, and they were on the verge of winning the first title since the late 80s. So I think he thought, if I can get this club to the level that they want to be at, that will be my legacy. I can retire. I can go. I know he's got family in the States now or North America. I think he could probably say I can retire, knowing that I was a hero in my homeland because I'd done it with, I took Juventus into the Champions League, I took Milan to 2 Champions League titles, I'd won Serie A few times, I'd won Real Madrid's 10th European Cup, I've won the Premier League, I've gone to France and won stuff with PSG. This will be the ultimate body of work, though, to sign off as a sort of person I am. And that's why I think the job at Everton appealed to him, because I think he sort of saw that. I can only guess that this is the way he was thinking at the time. He might have been a bit more sinister. He might have just been looking at it and saying, well, I'll stick with them because they're going to take me, and then when the next big job comes up, I'll be off. You don't know, but that's the way I read it at the time. I thought he was trying to build a legacy that sort of extends beyond being a check-up manager or only working with Cristiano Ronaldo and players like that ilk. The sort of, it's essentially a Chico for championship managers, isn't it? Those sorts of, jobs that come up with the big clubs who have bottomless resources and, stellar players. You've got to, this is why I feel like when people say Pep Guardiola's a check-up manager, I think that's probably quite disingenuous, really, because he's done it at Barcelona, working organically with his academy. He's done it at Manchester City. To spend money, don't get me wrong, but the idea that he's just a manager who throws money at things is completely untrue, whereas Ancelotti does seem to benefit from having the financial resources more. So, even in the small way to Jose Mourinho, I'd say. So, for him to take the Everton job, to me, seemed quite curious because it felt like Napoli marked Singh. And, when you look at the players Napoli brought in and that he had, they brought in Hervin Lozano. He would have been a brilliant fit for Everton. I think if Ancelotti had been Everton manager at the time when he became available. So, it did feel like there was a legacy being built. Potentially, and this was going to be his last job. Like the old bank robbers, one last job just to remember the good times. And he hasn't really been in that sort of level of management since the mid-90s. And obviously then he got his, he had power and then went to Juventus. So I think he was yearning to sort of basically bring things full circle, which is why he ended up at Everton. And I think Everton had the ambition to get him because he was the sort of manager who could have built something. And given a legacy to build on which he could have built. There was talk, this week about potentially in a few years, if he'd been under Ancelotti's wing for a few years, that Duncan Ferguson might have had the confidence and the abilities to become a manager himself and basically carry on Ancelotti's legacy. But that's all gone out the window now because Ancelotti has just shown, as you say, complete 180 on his values. And the biggest thing that I've struggled with in terms of getting my head around this is what did he actually say which was true. I was in every press conference, even before lockdown I was I was at his unveiling, I was at Fincham every week. Sometimes when it clashed with Liverpool I did pick Everton because Ancelotti's a very engaging character, and without sort of doing a disservice to Everton, Liverpool is widely covered, so if I did miss anything from press conference there was always a way to pick it up somehow. Whereas Everton is one of those things that you've got to be in from the get-go, otherwise potentially stuff will fall under the radar. There'll be quotes that don't get picked up by the headline writers and by the big outlets sometimes. So, it was always important for me to sort of have an understanding of what Ancelotti was saying, and sort of, good after bad, bad after indifferent, being there every week, even on Zoom calls, just to understand what he was saying. And the thing that struck me this week was, after all this has happened, was the Super League comments. He went two-footed on Florentino Perez and the other 11 teams who were in the Super League. But his friendship with Jurgen Klopp, but we keep getting told about by Jurgen and by Carlo himself. He didn't care about the friendship when he saw him on the Super League. But I do wonder, was that because he felt like he had to toe the party line because the club put out that absolutely barnstorming statement, which reflected how a lot of us felt about the Super League. I've got family members who are Liverpool fans who are season ticket holders. Even they agreed with everything. Even they agreed with what Ancelotti said. Mm-hmm. So for him to now jump into bed with Perez again, knowing that Real Madrid are still in the Super League, that they're refusing to back down, and that they could be one of two teams in the Super League because Barcelona will vote on the Super League proposals next month for their General Assembly. There could be two teams facing Champions League expulsion, and he's gone back in after saying, it was a joke. I thought they were joking. This is just not what football's about. It's not sporting integrity. And he's gone back there. I mean, that's what I find really difficult to struggle with in all this, because how can you come out and say that, and then a couple of weeks later, it's not like barely 6 weeks later, do a complete 180 and join the clubs who are not only joined the Super League, but are still in the Super League and refuse to back down. And, I hope and UEFA are leaning with them. Because if they're leaning with them, they'll just try it again. It just seems like a complete... it just doesn't tally for me. And that's what I find really difficult to understand about all this, about what did he say, what did he mean that he actually said? Because, as you mentioned about the love of Crosby, he couldn't move for him telling people about how much he loved Crosby. We did a sit-down with the New York Times and basically spent a good few minutes saying how great it is, and it came up in press conferences and the same thing happened. He was telling about us how much he loved the area, and he did a guest lecture for Liverpool University, and again, he was talking about how much he loves the area. Now, was that just lip service? You've got to suspect it was, because clearly when the next big job came along, he just took it.
Yeah. The robbery won't have helped, will it? And I don't think that's getting enough coverage from an Evertonian perspective, at least. It's hard to pass comments on that, because you can't exactly just say get on with it. Robberies happen every day, but at the same time, you've just hit the nail on the head. Like, was it all just lip service? How much he was singing, the local area's praises. I was listening to Duncan Castle's podcast previously, who basically said that Carlo was really unsettled. In particular with the Merseyside area, which is, as you say, perplexing. But before getting into that, you raised some really interesting points in regards to, your own experiences as a journalist and encounters with Carlo Ancelotti, which I would really like to hear. Does this, in effect, the complete 180 on all his comments and the values that he was supposed to have stood for, does this, in essence, I mean, again, I understand you're still wrapping your head around it. I'm still wrapping my head around it. The Super League comments alone, and the fact that he's gone back to the founding members of the Super League and one club that refused to back down is another angle that is, a rabbit hole that we can get stuck down if you want to. But, factoring in your experiences as a journalist covering Everton during his reign, does the actions of the man over the last couple of days completely change your perception of him now and his legacy almost as a whole?
Yeah, well, before we get on to that, I mean, you say about the consensus was he wasn't happy in the area. I don't think I'm breaking too many trades, you could say. But if he wasn't happy in the area, why did his son put his kid in one of the local schools not far from my house? And I can say that with absolute certainty, because I saw him. I go and pick my son up from a nursery round the corner, and every time I go down the road where the school's on, he'd be getting David Ancelotti would be getting out in his Everton trackie, and wouldn't even be hiding. He'd be hiding his initials on the jacket, but he'd still be wearing like an Everton jacket and stuff like that. So it wasn't really, this idea that I know education's important, but if he wasn't here for the long term, why would he put his kid in a Liverpool school? That really doesn't, that kind of debunks the idea that he wasn't happy on Merseyside. I feel like we were probably, maybe. I feel like Everton have been led down the garden path on this. I think the excuses about he wasn't happy on Merseyside and stuff like that, I feel like that's a bit of a half truth. I mean, as you say, the robbery can't have helped, but I mean, how many Everton and Liverpool players have had the houses turned over when they've been at work? I mean, you go back 15 years, Liverpool players' houses were getting turned over, including in my local area, when they were on Champions League duty. And even when they were just at Anfield, they were getting turned over, left, right and centre. Half of those players didn't leave. The managers, who were at the club didn't have that misfortune, but I can't imagine they would have thought, well, sod this, I'm off. But anyway, back to the point at hand. I think this really has tarnished his legacy because he could have built something here and he refused him. And it just, what's so going about it is that, Everton have lost managers before, we know that. And the one that really sticks out for me, people are going to compare it to David Moyes. Now, David Moyes was very early, well, a couple of years into my time covering Everton, and the rumours about his future never went away because he hadn't signed a contract. People were saying he signed one with Chelsea. People were saying he signed an 18-month extension at Everton. And I was putting these to people at the club and saying, well, what's the story? I said, well, there's no story. Nothing's happened. Nothing's changed. But Moyes never said, I want to be here for the next 10 years. I want to be here when Kirby, Walnut Park, whatever comes up, whatever stadium ever end up in, I want to be here for that. I want to be here when the club celebrates, a huge milestone of success. I want to be the man behind that. Ancelotti has gone out and said exactly that repeatedly, not just a one-off. It's not just, something being taken out of context. So, in terms of his legacy, I think it's absolutely destroyed on Merseyside. I don't think he'll really care. He's won a title at Chelsea, he's won a couple of Serie A with Milan, he's won them 2 Champions Leagues, he won Madrid the 10th European Cup. There's proved as elusive for them as the league title did to Liverpool. They only went probably about 15 years before they won the next one, whereas Liverpool obviously went 30, but you get the idea. So I don't think he cares. He probably isn't well thought of in Napoli either, to be honest. I can't imagine he's very well thought of. I think there'll be some understanding because, he was pushed before he jumped. But I feel like the fans will probably think you could have done better. You look at the positions, you look at the performances. I mean, off the top of my head, I don't actually know if they even won a Coppa Italia or a Super Coppa. I don't even know if they've even gotten that far. So I think his legacy at Napoli, I don't think he'll care about that because, he's very much Milan through and through. He's been around Serie A a few times, but Milan's where his heart is in Italy. So Napoli's probably an afterthought to him. And I think Everton's even less one because if he was willing to leave a job, willingly, then I don't think he cares what happens. But for me, he's definitely very low down on the list because we've seen managers who've come here and are looking for the next horizon. Roberto Martinez, case in point, basically seems to be hanging for the Barcelona job. Didn't get it. Didn't even get close to it. And, his work at Everton didn't help him. But then Ronald Koeman comes in and has the same idea. He wants the Barcelona job. This is just a stepping stone. Now, because they didn't reach that stepping stone, if they walked out on Everton for those jobs, say if Martinez walked out on Everton for Belgium, you'd feel a bit cheated, especially after the first season and a quarter. After he inherited that great foundation from Moyes, you'd feel a bit cheated. If Koeman had done it after he got Everton to the Europa League and was promised to bring in all these exciting signings, you'd have felt cheated. But they didn't. They didn't even get to that level because their stock rapidly disintegrated. Whereas Ancelotti had the chance to build something, and instead thought, "Nah, I'm going to take the easy option." So that's what's annoying because he didn't even get it to go through the full cycle. As you say, Everton have had however many turnarounds in the past few years, but at least there was a process. You showed the middle point, you showed the drop off. This didn't even have a rise. This had a stability period, and it was meant to have a rise, and then maybe it might have fell away, or it might have just been, fair to middling. So for him to walk out, I think he's absolutely done with Everton. I think they're never gonna. There's never going to be any affection for him. Put it that way.
And that's what hurts because he was so popular, and there was such affection for him there in how he conducted himself. Yes, it all turned out to be a bag of lies, but the manner in which he conducted himself, the stand-up nature, the sort of warm, embracing fashion he had towards the press, towards the supporters. I don't like the fact that he was almost treated somewhat as a circus attraction. I do think we could have handled him a lot better in that respect. I don't know why we decided to have him giving guest lectures at Uni Liverpool or all these different sort of unique experiences with Carlo Ancelotti. I think he needed to make his mark on the club before doing something like that, similar to what Klopp's done at Liverpool. But you raised it there, in that there was somewhat of a rise in the earlier part of the season just gone. Obviously, we started so well. Dominic Calvert-Lewin has improved dramatically in a short space of time, obviously scoring the first goal under the reign of Carlo Ancelotti against Burnley, and then just was on fire for the most part of that last season, scoring a hell of a lot of goals, seeing us in and around the top of the league or the Champions League places. We were second on Boxing Day, and then we just completely fell away as the season transpired, and any opportunity to hold on to European places, we just simply came up short and faltered, which it doesn't come as a surprise to us given our experiences over the years. But when you look at Carlo Ancelotti's reign objectively, I've got his stats in front of me here. 67 played, 31 won, 14 draws, 27 losses, 46.27% win percentage, which is significantly higher than some of his predecessors, but I think his points per game ratio, I think I saw that on a transfer market post yesterday, I believe. I think it was even lower than what it was when he was at Napoli. I guess this is another obstacle that Everton have got to overcome now, is the state of the squad. And again, this is maybe where Marcel Brands come in and should be taking more control. I don't know why I'm hearing the whole board pitching in on who they think the next manager should be when there's Marcel Brands as director of football. But the squad, I remember shortly after the Manchester City game, speaking on the Unholy Trinity podcast, and I think it was Lee who said it's a Frankenstein squad still. After so many years now, it's still an absolute Frankenstein of a squad. Still at times very hard to watch with no real clear playing identity. Yes, we've got our standout players like Dominic Calvert-Lewin, Richarlison when he's firing, Ben Godfrey is proven to be an excellent buy, Luca Dean when he's on form. I would stick my neck out and say Jordan Pickford, because I don't think Everton are going to attract a keeper of better quality. So there are a few players that we could build a squad around. But that being said, Rich, how would you analyse the performance of the squad over the course of Carlo Ancelotti's reign? Because obviously we've attracted players with him as our manager that God knows if they're going to stick around now.
Yeah, I think the Frankenstein squad analogy is very, very fitting, and especially when you look, it's not just the managers who've had an input as director of football too. I think Gylfi Sigurdsson is a classic example. We go back to 2017 when Koeman was in charge, and we had that disastrous 3 number 10s experiment, and you could see who had picked who. So Koeman had picked Davy Klassen, understandably, ex-Ajax player, just been to the Europa League final. Wayne Rooney, Bill Kenwright choice, clearly. Bill's never shied away from his affection for Wayne. And then Gylfi Sigurdsson seemed like a Steve Walsh signing.
Yep. And
now only one of them is still in the team, and that's Gylfi Sigurdsson. So Steve Walsh is caught into over that one. And then you look at the rest of the squad. Again, this is always a curious situation for me when you have people other than the manager making the decisions, because when Moyes was in charge, you knew he was making the decisions. Yeah. When Martinez was in charge, you knew. Once Steve Walsh came in, that skewed the dynamic and that blurred the lines. And I've seen that at Liverpool as well. Liverpool have had this really weird infatuation amongst the supporters, obsession you could even call it, of who signs who. Was it the director of football? Was it the manager? Was it this infamous transfer committee that Liverpool assembled in 2012? And everyone's trying to apportion blame to the players who didn't work out. And who's taking the blame for it? Is it the scouts, the chief scouts? Is it the sporting director? Is it the manager? And that's what's happened at Everton. You look at some of these players now and you think, who signed him? Was that a Marcel Brand signing, or is that a Marco Silva signing, or is that a Carlo Ancelotti signing? You know, it's very difficult to unpick, really, apart from, obviously, I say the ones that are staring in the face, as they were in 2017, they're the ones that stand out. But, I mean, I think the reason why the players that Ancelotti attracted came in was because Everton sacrificed their strategy almost to give him what he wanted.
Yeah.
They believed, misguidedly clearly in hindsight, and you can't blame them for it, but they believe if you give him what he wants, he will build a solid basis. You might have to buy a few late 20s players, not ideal, but they'll work for him, they'll run through big walls for him, or they're meant to be anyway. That's why you had Alan coming in, who is generally a good defensive enforcer, but obviously, you know, since he's come to Everton, clearly pace is an issue, and you know he's looked a bit languid. James Rodriguez, when he's been fit and when he's been up for it, has been brilliant. I mean, I can't see Rodriguez sticking about. I think Madrid will end up hopefully getting suckered into paying 15-20 million for him. You know, he came on a free transfer, so that's a profit for Everton if he does go back to Madrid for Ancelotti. And you know, he didn't leave on good terms when he was released. So I can't imagine once Ancelotti's out the door again that he'll be in favour with them, especially when he's turning 30 this year. So
that one is hurt, I think, especially for like the younger fans and the growing market now in South America. That's not going to do the club any favours to let him go.
It's not, but at the same time, the danger is that you don't want a player who's not going to be happy. I mean, you know, it's difficult because when he was on it, he was brilliant. But I think if you're looking back now, you think when he wasn't fit for games, or Ancelotti was saying, you know, he hasn't recovered, and then he was on a plane to South America on the final weekend of the season, you felt like he wasn't really emotionally invested. And if he's not emotionally invested because he's probably got an inkling or, you know, a tip off that his manager's not, then that's where the whole thing unravels. When he plays, you know, at the peak of his powers, he's absolutely brilliant. But playing at the peak of your powers is very rare when you don't have the motivation or you know, the appetite, which clearly he didn't have in the final weeks of the season. So I can see why they tried to, you know, sign short-term options in the late 20s. That made sense in terms of having a solid base. But at the same time, now Everton are going to have a lot of these players who they can't get rid of. I mean, I don't think, fortunately, Josh King was a short-term deal, so he won't be too difficult to shift. That'll just be a straight, you know, thanks for not doing much, but we're not going to renew your contract. Alan, I think we might have to go back to Italy or maybe somewhere where it's a bit more leisurely paced. Rodriguez will probably end up going to Madrid, so you know they'll be easy to shift. But it's like Abdoulaye Doucouré, you know, he's come to 28, 29 now. Well, you know, I'm going to shift him if he doesn't fit in with the manager's style. So, you know, Everton have been burned not just on appointing Ancelotti, but also, you know, being convinced that they need to build a squad that he's happy with, and by getting in these short-term, limited lifespan type of players, and I think that's going to hurt them. And you know, as you say, adding that Frankenstein squad, which is essentially what the new manager, whoever he is, will inherit, it makes it even more difficult to move people on. You know, it's, you know, anyone who's played Football Manager knows you always inherit a squad where you want to get rid of players. There's players you don't want in that team. There's players who technically aren't suited to your style. I mean, I know it's easy saying, as you know, when we're not actual managers, but the same principles apply. So yeah. I do fear for who will come in and who needs to be kicked off the wage bill first, because it's an absolute mess. And when, you know, Everton's record signing is still at the club, and he was signed by a director of football who's been out of the job for 3 years, it just shows how limited the window is for getting rid of these players, because they come in on big money and big wages, and then you're stuck with them. And then you end up with players like Yannick Bolasie, Mohamed Bezic, those sorts of types of players who are just running the contracts down. And Everton can't operate like that. You know, it's not. We hear this mantra, and it really bothers me. It does really bother me that Everton is just a charity with a football club attached to it. And I hate that suggestion, because you've got to differentiate between what the club, the stalemate the club does in the community, and the football club. But when players are getting signed by various managers and directors of football, and they're being basically given cushy contracts that they could sit on for the next 5 years and run down and have someone on a free, that analogy does feel worryingly accurate. And And that's the challenge that Everton have got to try and shift. This perception they've got to shift. And this is the biggest task Marcel Brands is going to have. In one, getting an appointment who fits what Everton are after. And two, making sure they can get rid of the players who have been, let's be honest, taking the mickey a bit. You look at last summer, that Alex Iwobi post on social media. I mean, that really showed the sort of how tone deaf some of the players are to what's going on at the club and the sort of the supporter base. Because I don't think, if any other club, a player had done put the shifts in that he'd put in and played the way he played and his teammates had played, they wouldn't be loading it up on social media. So it just kind of shows that Everton are a bit of a soft touch in terms of, the past recruitment. And you've got to hope that maybe this summer, maybe in January, maybe in the following summer, with a manager who will stay for more than 18 months, they might be able to get that right. And again, Marcel Brand is the man who's going to have to make that decision.
Yeah, and I've got to be honest, Rich, this is part of the reason why it's hard for me to really care anymore, because the club have been in that same situation for like 4 years. It's got to be now, where I very much do feel like these players that we have brought in, some of them that are there, Alex Iwobi, Gylfi Sigurdsson, although he does get a game, Cenk Tosun, Theo Walcott, Yannick Bolasie, Davy Klaassen, Nikola Vlasic, all of these players that if recruitment had a common goal and the recruitment was astute and almost as if it was when it was David Moyes as manager, these players should be helping Everton contributing towards that goal of attaining European football, then attaining Champions League football, then competing for league titles and winning honours. And the fact that, make no bones about it, mate, and I think this is one of the overriding points that is irking me so much, is that we're back at square one again, and I'm bored of it now. Honestly, I'm bored of it. Like, I'm at a point where I feel like I could almost take out that subjective interest in football and just sort of observe it objectively, appreciating the sport for what it is. I'm fascinated by the business ongoings and the commercial side of the sport. I always have been. But just to watch sport, as football as a sport, a passionate supporter nonetheless, but with no particular interest in one side. Obviously, you'll have your preferences, but not an undying love for a club like I've got for Everton, which is rapidly sort of dying away. Going off on a bit of a tangent here on a sort of personal thing, I guess, but it's killing me seeing the team and the club turn into what they are. Like, the fact that we finished 10th, like below Arsenal, below Leeds, like, it's, I don't know how anybody involved at a football club can deem that as okay. And I guess one of the pros of having Carlo Ancelotti as the manager for the time that he was there was that it wasn't the case of that, the players couldn't turn, the players, the fans, the press, nobody could turn around and really point their finger at the manager and pull out, he's inexperienced, as they did with Marco Silva, or the football shite, as it was, just Route 1, as it was with Sam Allardyce. Or, again, to an extent with Roberto Martinez, it's like insanity doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. But, and I think this is an interesting talking point, to what extent, when this season started unravelling, was it Carlo Ancelotti's fault? Because he come out with the comment, I can't remember it word for word, but that he said, the games that we set up defensively and looked to exploit on the counter, we were successful, and those that we looked to take the game to the opposition and be the controlling force, we lost, or something along those lines. As I say, I can't remember it word for word, but I'd be interested to hear from your perspective, obviously actually going to the games and watching Everton. You've rightly outlined there, mate, there's a lot of players there that and involved in the squad that we know shouldn't be, quite frankly. But to what extent could you blame Carlo Ancelotti ultimately for another season without a trophy and a 10th place finish?
To be honest, I mean, Ancelotti said it in his Madrid unveiling, didn't he? He said, it was a successful season, which I found an absolute astounding comment to make. To say that's that sort of condescending head pat, little old Everton, know your place sort of thing. And that's what, when you got that sort of attitude coupled with what we saw with the Super League a few weeks ago, I completely understand why people like yourself feel disheartened with football. Don't get me wrong, I've questioned it myself in the past few weeks, but in terms of Ancelotti, I actually spoke to someone who used to work at Everton a few weeks during the season running. I forget what game it was. But one of the questions to me was, is Ancelotti getting a free ride because he's Ancelotti? And I said, I think the squad's probably not good enough, but probably to a large extent, yeah. And then when you look at the performances, you can slate Gylfi Sigurdsson, you can slate certain players for not turning up. You can slate Rodriguez for phoning it in. But ultimately, the decision to send them out there, the decision for the tactical setup, whether they go and chase the game or whether they sit back and try and nick a 1-0 win, that's on the manager. So for me, when it starts unravelling, that's on Ancelotti. And I know people will say that the Man City cancellation on the 28th of December disrupted them. It certainly disrupted those of us who were on our way to Goodison. But I think City still would have blown Everton away, even with a half-strength squad. So I think that's when it would have started unravelling. I think once you come up against a team like City, like United in the Carabao Cup, like West Ham, who were clearly on an upward trajectory under David Moyes, those sorts of games were going to be his undoing. And I think that would show how limited he actually had been as a manager, and also how little he changed it. And to a certain extent, I think he got lucky. You look at some of the results. I know he's trumpeting the away form. He came up against the Man United team who were not really at it. They were really, were basically had moved in quotes joint top of the Premier League over the new year. It's still second place, whatever they say. But and they went and nicked a draw there. They went to Anfield and finally won because Liverpool were on the knees.
Yeah,
they beat a Tottenham team that didn't actually know its own identity because Jose Mourinho was basically being led by the nose by Jorge Mendes with some of the deals that were being done like McDoherty. Arsenal clearly were concerned more with the Europa League. But then you look at other teams like Chelsea. He's all about the away form, but then they go into the shell against Chelsea. So, I think Ancelotti's got to take the blame. He's happy to take the plaudits, but he's also got to take a lot of the blame because a lot of the performances at Goodison were very defeatist, very mind-numbing. I mean, it was always quite cold at those games, but it was even worse when the football was so sterile. I think generally I used to come out to those games trying to, unfreeze my brain as well as my limbs. It was that bad. I mean, the only time I actually came out to Goodison thinking, yeah, that was all right. That was the Tottenham game, and that was just Bedlam in the cup. So Ancelotti's got to take the blame for a lot of this. He can't, he's going on about how Everton are lucky and they were fighting relegation and this, that, and the other, and you should be thankful I graced you with my presence for 16 months or so. I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's fair on Everton because they gave him a lot of money, 11 million a year contract. We signed Decore for best part of 20 million, Allen for the best part of 20 million, Rodriguez on eye-watering wages, and they brought him in with the remit of trying to improve the squad, trying to get rid of some of the excess deadwood, trying to improve it performance-wise as well as personnel-wise, and he's not done it. So for me, this is entirely on him, and I would still have said this in the summer. When you look at the final three games, losing to Sheffield United, who were down, scraping a win against Wolves, whose manager was on the way out and could potentially be on his way into Everton now, concerningly, and then getting trounced by Man City, who basically just used it as an excuse to parade the Premier League trophy.
Aguero's testimonial. The testimonial.
A decent send-off in front of the fans. Exactly. And that's, so, that running and, all the results, Fulham, Newcastle, Burnley at home, it wasn't plain sailing, it wasn't great. And, the way he was talking about how we need to improve our home form, all well and good, but that doesn't really excuse the way you played. And I listened to the Guardian podcast earlier this week, and Andy Hunt made a really valid point about if he set up the way he set up for most of these behind closed doors games at Goodison, the fans wouldn't have it, the Gladys wouldn't have it, the Paddock would be on his case, the Bullens would be on his case. So I think it's on him personally. It's completely on him.
Yeah, that's a fair assessment. I think you've assessed that broadly, and yeah, like from a tactical perspective, it was pretty numbing to watch at times, especially when we'd alternate between the 4 and the 5 back. I don't really want to go relive it again, really, to be honest with you, mate, because I did have such high hopes for us. I think especially after the opening couple of months of the season, and then when you look at Boxing Day when we were second, I remember when we beat Sheffield United at Bramall Lane, and I was thinking, you know what, that is usually the type of game where Everton slip up and they start to fall away. But the fact that they've won that with a late winner gives me hope that at least a European finish is on the cards. And as you say, the fact that they finished 10th, and then Ancelotti to turn around and say it was a successful season, and that they were battling relegation the season before when they were about 16 points off in the mid-table. Again, it just shows these complete contradictions in his character, which don't sit well with me at all. Just a blatant liar, which is horrible to say considering how I held him in high regard. And his achievements in football speak for themselves. But I got to be honest, like, it would be hard to sit and sort of look the man in the eyes after what he's said and what he's done over the course of the last couple of days. And this would be interesting to talk about, given your love for Spanish football, and this is something that I'm deliberating now, given the challenges that Everton now faces, taking a step back and going into German football and Spanish football, those two in particular, leagues, the Bundesliga and La Liga, that I really did love growing up, watching when I was a kid. But I'd seen an observation, I can't remember quite where it was from, but the fact that Real Madrid have appointed Carlo Ancelotti, apparently it was something like, it really spoke to how unprepared they were to replace Zinedine Zidane. And listening to Duncan Castle's podcast, really sort of opened my eyes in that apparently Max Allegri had given Real Madrid his word, but personal circumstances and the fact that it was Juventus again saw him, prefer a return to Juventus. Supposedly, Madrid's board held a meeting to discuss candidates, the likes of Pochettino, Conte and whatnot, but Carlo Ancelotti's representatives reached out to Madrid themselves, explaining that Carlo was unhappy at Everton and could get out of his contract easily, which is another thing that blows my mind, the fact that Everton aren't getting any compensation out of this deal, of which, of course, Florentino Perez loved the idea. I know they had a dispute which ultimately led to Carlo being sacked around Gareth Bale and his agent, but all this consequently has left Everton in an awful situation. So what could you pass comment on Real Madrid's sort of involvement in this? And I know you fly the flag for Barcelona high, but would you agree with the statement that they were largely unprepared to replace Zidane?
I think when they say about they're unprepared, I don't think they're ever unprepared. Real Madrid, I think there's always a plot twist, isn't there, with them?
Yeah.
They do seem to have that sort of habit of trying to line someone up, don't they? And you look at when they lost it on in 2018 after he won the Champions League final against Liverpool, and him, Bale, and Ronaldo were all on TV saying, "I'm not really sure what we future here," and he went and posted Spain coach on the eve of the World Cup. Which was mind blowing, because I was on my way to Russia at the time, and I just thought, this is going to be chaos. Spain aren't going to get anywhere near the final. They're favourites to win it, and then so I think Madrid always had a plan. Whether they tapped him up, our initial headline was that Madrid poached Ancelotti, which people might disagree with, because clearly he's a willing participant. But when a manager's barely halfway through a 4.5-year contract and another team appoints him as their manager, that's as close to poaching as you get for me. So I think Madrid have always got a plan. I think they've always got they've always got a backup, haven't they? So I think they would have had this in mind, but I think they probably thought Allegri was coming in and then thought, well, we'll go for the fellow we can always rely upon. So I think Madrid would have had a plan. I think every club has a plan, really. I go back to the Liverpool situation with Jurgen Klopp. They were going to appoint Klopp probably a fortnight beforehand. It's been documented the Klopp gave a presentation in New York to FSG and things like that. So I think there's always a plan with clubs. I don't think it's exclusive to Real Madrid. I think other big clubs do the same thing, but I mean, how much they have directly influenced this and how much Ancelotti's met them halfway, I don't know. I mean, I would take issue with the idea that everyone got zero compensation, because my understanding is compensation fee was agreed because you don't just rip up a 4.5-year contract, no matter how far in you are, because he says, I want to go to a club that I like. Doesn't work that way. So I take these claims with a very huge pinch of salt. So I wouldn't take that as being truthful personally. But yeah, clubs like Madrid, clubs like Bayern, clubs like Liverpool, Man United even, although United recently, to be fair to them, have gone a little bit too far the other way, where they started flying by the seat of the pants. I think when Louis van Gaal was sacked, they had Mourinho lined up. Pep Guardiola was lined up to replace Pellegrini at City. Most clubs, unless they are bereft of leadership and foresight, have a replacement lined up. So I don't think Ancelotti's agent just kind of begged Madrid. I think Madrid had him in mind, and there will have been some sounding out. And when you look back, as I say, on the social media stuff, a lot of things do add up now. When you look back at certain posts and what people said and what Richarlison posted and stuff like that, a lot of things do add up. So I think there was definitely some sort of collaboration between the two parties in advance of this. I don't buy this argument. It was Saturday that they started talking. I think that was formally when it started, but I think there might have been some sort of feelers put out by intermediaries and whatnot. But unfortunately, we'll never know until one of those breaks ranks and speaks. So I think it's one of those that we're going to have to just speculate on for now.
Yeah, that's true. And again, I feel from an Everton perspective, this leaves them at such a disadvantageous position in that Richarlison will want to get off now, won't he? Surely,
Recording stop. Recording in progress.
So, this as a whole leaves Everton at a real disadvantageous position in that you'll have a lot of players looking to follow suit and jump ship as they're no longer under the coaching or management of Carlo Ancelotti and his team. And not like it hasn't been before, but the pressure really is on the higher ups at Everton to get this next managerial appointment spot on. And for me, again, just down to the standards that I hold this club to, it had to be Antonio Conte or it had to be Mauricio Pochettino, but it's not going to be, and I know it's not going to be because one's just won the Scudetto and the other's just got to the semi-final of the Champions League, and you can't just throw money at those people. You've got to offer them a vision, or European football at least. And for me, what hurts a lot is that it very much feels like we're just back in the same boat as we were when David Moyes left 2013, and that all these managerial candidates being floated about, none of which I believe are up to the standard that Everton Football Club should demand of their managers. Nuno Espirito Santo, of course, is rumoured to be someone who's being spoken to about the job, who, especially when you look at how Wolves performed this season, I don't quite fancy. He did well when they first come up into the Premier League, but it seemed like when they lost Raul Jimenez, he unravelled quite a fair bit. To be fair, though, it's just a bit of a side note, but if he does come in and we can land Ruben Neves, that'll be a consolation for me. I'd love to see him play for Everton. But again, listening to that podcast, Frank Lampard was another name that got mentioned, which I don't want to see. I can just envisage like the press release with Lampard being packaged as a proven winner, which I feel like is the last thing that Everton need. Porto's manager, Conceição, I can't pronounce his Portuguese name. That interests me slightly, but again, it just has shades of Vitor Pereira. who went off to Qatar, I believe it was, to manage in Qatar. So you've got the player aspect, both players leaving and trying to get players in. And you've got Marcel Brands and the director of football, who should be controlling who the next manager is. And then, of course, you've got the managerial aspect. And even if you want to go there, the executive side of things and the boardroom. So to wrap this up in the next 10-20 minutes, Rich, where do Everton Football Club go from here?
One, isn't it? I mean, as you say, it feels like we've all been transported back to summer 2013 when Moyes walked out because he had, Alex Ferguson's legacy basically festooned upon him.
Yeah.
I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? Because you feel like all the names it will linked are underwhelming. And, I've kind of railed against the idea of someone like Graham Potter or Eddie Howe coming in because I feel like that just sends out the wrong message. I feel like whoever you get, it's going to be underwhelming. It's going to be disappointing. There's been reports about Everton are going to go for a coach with no Premier League experience. Which, I mean, how bad could that go? Really, let's be honest. It looks like it could be a disaster waiting to happen. But at the same time, you look at Bielsa. He had no experience in English football, and he's suddenly from the Championship into the Premier League, and then is finished above Everton. So clearly, having no actual experience in the league isn't a bad thing, but in terms of who comes in, it's tough, isn't it? And, it does feel like we are on a bit of a reset path here. And, I mean, someone like Espirito Santo clearly has merits. Obviously, he's an underwhelming appointment, no question, but when you look at the players that he was managed to attract at Wolves, largely, we suspect, because of his agents, it might have benefits. You might see, maybe not someone like Pedro Neto or Ruben Neves coming in, but you might see players of a similar profile who are on the guest roster, payroll, whatever you want to call it. So you might see players like that coming in, so that might be a benefit, but it's still an underwhelming choice. And, as you say, they tailed off once Raul Jimenez went off injured in that Liverpool game, in the Arsenal game. So I think, and there's people like Paulo Fonseca, City Cancellation, Marcelo Gallardo, who's getting a lot of Everton fans excited because he seems like a bit of a madman. But I mean, it's encouraging that they are looking at managers who don't have the experience of the Premier League, because you're not going to get, a same old. You're not going to get a Graham Potter or an Eddie Howe who are sort of known quantities. You can spin the surprise like Bielsa did with Leeds. But I think whoever they end up with will still be an underwhelming choice because of what Everton have lost. It's not like with Moyes. I mean, I know it was, we're losing a good manager, a stable manager for, essentially a guy who got relegated with Wigan, regardless of the FA Cup run. That was basically what he was. Similar with Marco Silva, a guy who was underwhelming at Watford once he supposedly had his head turned by Everton. Ronald Koeman, first mid. Ancelotti was the only one who stood out as a very box office appointment. So anyone else is going to feel like a bit of a flop in comparison. But unfortunately, this is the situation they're in now, and they need to find someone who is able to evolve the club, the squad, instill a winning mentality. Because Ancelotti might have won as many trophies, as you can name in world football, but you've got to say some of the performances and some of the attitudes in games and in that run post Boxing Day was so underwhelming that you would question his own credentials. So it's going to be someone who has a bit of a mentality. You don't want to have someone who's too aggressive or too belligerent, like Allardyce. You don't want to have someone who's too genie like Martinez. You don't have someone who's just placating like Koeman. You want to have someone who's invested emotionally in the club, but also not to the extent that Martinez was, and also not to the touch like a lot of his successes were. And seemingly you'd include Ancelotti in that now.
Yeah, and I mean, from a player's perspective, do you see this now as a sort of watershed moment where Richarlison, some of the top assets that the club have, Richarlison, Calvert-Lewin, potentially. We've talked about James Rodriguez, but even Ben Godfrey, could they jump ship as well?
Ben Godfrey, I don't think will. Ben Godfrey's come on leaps and bounds. I just think you need someone who's going to bring the best out of him to sort of continue his evolution. You know, he was on the cusp of England Euros call up. You know, made the provisional squad. So his stock is clear on the rise, and it's about making sure he feels valued and feels like he's developing in the right way. But Chelsea is interesting. I actually interviewed him a few weeks ago for the Metro, and the way he spoke about Ancelotti, I mean, I know he lost his head with him a few times in games, but there seems to be a genuine affection there. And if Ancelotti believes that Richarlison can bring something to Real Madrid attack, I think he'll come in for him. I think Richarlison will jump at the chance. I mean, I think Richarlison might end up, if someone has the resources to time and if, you know, they've got the profile that he wants, Champions League, Europa League, what have you, I think he might consider it, because he'll have been through 3 managers, 2 permanents and 1 caretaker, and he will just think, is this what it's just going to be like? It's just going to be a constant turnover. So you could see him going. Rodriguez, as I say, is either going to end up back at Madrid, or he'll probably end up taking, you know, a bit of a cushy job, should we say, maybe an MLS job, something like that. Potentially, I can't see him going to any of the big top 5 leagues unless he's going to Madrid. Calvert-Lewin, I've got to say, Calvert-Lewin is probably one of the few players who truly developed under Ancelotti. And there was noticeable. Godfrey, I think, had qualities which weren't really showcased at Norwich because they were outside the Premier League spotlight. So I think he was always going to be a talent. But Calvert-Lewin has evolved and improved, and obviously he's been rewarded with his England call and his goals this season. Who take a punt on him? You know, there's talk of Man United. I don't think they're going to do that. I'm struggling to see who would actually want to take a gamble on him, and also how much he costs, because Everton hold the cards in this. It's not going to be like the Ancelotti situation where, you know, a Cooking's flustered eyelids and that's it. Yeah. He's gone. It's a bit more complex for players' contracts. So Everton will hold the cards. So Everton will probably get 8 times what they pay for Carlo, and they're probably looking at, well, not even 8 times, probably 10 times. They'll probably get easy 45 million for them if they're going, and that is then given to the new managers to reinvest. But the trade-off of that is you're losing a great goal scorer who has become a true poacher, and it, you know, before he's the only person at Everton who actually benefited from working under Ancelotti, because I don't think a lot of these players, you know, you can't take a Southgate and turn it into Sil Pearce. Players like Sigurdsson, Iwobi, Gomez, Josh King, they're not going to become great players overnight. Calvert-Lewin's young enough, he had raw attributes and needed refining. So, but I think Calvert-Lewin will also have an appreciation that if the right manager comes in and makes him the focal point, which he should be anyway, as the, you know, England striker, newly minted England striker, I think he'll stick around. But I think Richarlison's probably question mark over potentially. If a big offer came in with a decent sort of profile, I mean, you've got to remember, before he joined Watford, he was on the way to go to Ajax, you know, and then Marco Silva stepped in and went, "No, you're coming with me," and that was it. So I think Richarlison could be one who goes off. I think Alan, as I say, might go to Italy again, and Rodriguez might go either for a nice semi-retirement gig in America, or he might go with Ancelotti. But beyond that, I think the rest of the squad seems quite stable. I mean, obviously with maybe the exception of probably Luka Digne, who's been outstanding at left back, one of the best left backs in Europe, I'd say.
Yep.
So there is a risk there, but again, I also feel like because he's signed a new deal, Everton hold the cards again, and you know they've got players like Godfrey who can play at left back quite admirably. So I can't see there being much risk there really. I don't think there'll be many teams in the market for left back this summer. So apart from the ones I mentioned, I can't see there being too much disruption to the squad. I mean, maybe Robin Olsen isn't going to be staying because Ancelotti's gone, and also he had a bit of a personal ordeal with, obviously, like Ancelotti, he had his own house turned over and his family sort of traumatised by it. So, which you can understand he wouldn't want to stick around after that. But also, I'd rather have his house continue as the backup goalkeeper, because I thought he fared better against Man City in the Cup than Olsen did in a lot of the games for Everton. So, in terms of the squad changes, I can't see there being a great deal apart from shifting the Ancelotti favourite, shall we say, and maybe a big casualty will be Richarlison in my book.
Yeah, I agree. And you say question marks over his future, and I think to conclude, there's just again another end to a season where there's massive question marks over Everton Football Club's future. you'd like to think, and I don't know how many times I've said this now, that this is the catalyst to getting somebody in who, as you say, gets the club, but is stoic enough to see us achieve both long-term and short-term goals in a progressive fashion. And fingers crossed, I'll get a couple of more of these podcasts in the bag, and hopefully rekindle me passion for Everton Football Club. Because as I say, at the moment, I'm still hurting from this. I really am. I can't lie. It does hurt. I felt like we were on the right track, even if this season did falter and finish poorly. I do feel like going forward that we could have achieved something under Carlo Ancelotti, and the fact that the man has been so two-faced is something that I did not expect. But Rich, I just want to say, mate, as always, it's been a pleasure to talk with you. Thanks for sharing your experiences and your stories and your opinions. And as I say, I really do enjoy a good conversation. So thanks for giving me one, and you'll be back on the podcast in no time, I'm sure.
No problem. Hopefully we're talking in happiest times rather than going through the same old again.
Aye, you'd like to think so, mate. Take care.